Hi, everybody. This is Brass Check, and today we're going to be talking with Sandy Rosenthal of levies.org. Welcome, Sandy.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's amazing, Sandy, how many people I encounter when I tell them that, it really wasn't a hurricane that destroyed New Orleans. It was the failure of the levees. And now everybody goes, "Oh, I knew that." And I want to politely or impolitely tell them, "No, you didn't. You didn't know that until a handful of people, small handful of people, led by Sandy, uh, countless thousands and thousands and thousands of hours, A, did the research to figure out what really happened, and B, I guess, did the really hard work, which was to get the news media to tell the truth. The flood, of course, the federal levee flood was in 2005. And when did the Associated Press finally decide to tell all the reporters in America that it wasn't a hurricane?
That was in 2022.
Okay. So my math's not great, but I think that's 17 years. So it took the Associated Press 17 years. And believe me, none of this happened by itself. Sandy was on, all right. Sandy was on all of the New York Times, the CNN, the BBC, the NBC, ABC, Christian Science Monitor. It was a nonstop, I'm going to say it, war to get them to simply look at the facts and tell the truth. And it's instructive that the Associated Press was the last 17 years to go. And that's really significant because all newspapers in America read whatever the Associated Press says about anything. They have a style book. So when you get them to change their style book, you've really accomplished something. So it's all documented in this marvelous book, uh, Words Whispered in Water. I should know the title by now, but Words Whispered in Water. Um, this is the original edition. A new edition is going to come out in 2025. If you want to know what it takes to change the world, which Sandy did as vis-a-vis New Orleans and the truth about what happened there, this book is a manual. uh, it's a day. It's like day by day, right? Almost.
Almost right down to the minute.
Yeah, blow by blow account of everything that it took. And if anybody's at the beginning of something like this, just know it takes a lot. Uh, but Sandy prevailed. Sandy prevailed. And so now we all know that it wasn't Mother Nature that did it to New Orleans. It was the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and that's what happened. Uh, so now we're going to talk about the Levy's latest initiative, which is so important, so common sense, but of course it's going to take a lot of effort to get the common sense to be common. Can you describe what the latest Levy's project is?
Certainly. Well, by accident, I discovered something I didn't know. And that's often how the best discoveries happen. You stumble upon it by accident without looking. And right in the year 2020, the year 2020, an agent of mine, his name is Steve O'Keefe, was helping me reach out to universities and let them know about my book, because my book could be a poli-sci book, it could be in engineering, it could be political science, it could be in history, and all kinds of uses. And we found out by accident at that time that engineering schools do not routinely instruct their students about disasters, or excuse me, engineering failures
Hmm.
and the lessons learned. The
Wow.
only time students may get some instruction on failures is if a professor has a particular personal interest in something,
Hmm.
and then they might hear about it. Well, naturally, after having survived personally the worst engineering disaster in the history of the United States and in the world, second only to Chernobyl, naturally, I thought something needed to be done about that. And so I started doing some research and I found out some interesting things. Is now a good time to say the first important thing?
Sure.
Sure. So it turns up that I wasn't the first to notice this.
Okay.
Of course not. It's a major thing. It turns up that a group of really good guys at the American Society of Civil Engineers noticed the same issue. And in the 1990s, they approached universities directly and encouraged them to provide instruction on lessons learned. And here's why. the same mistakes tend to be made over and over.
Mm.
How about that? And so they went straight to the universities. The initiative failed, and it failed primarily because the universities don't listen to engineering experts. They listen to ABET, and that is the accrediting body, the people who accredit the universities.
Okay.
So you see where this is going.
Gotcha. Yeah.
All about accreditation, which is also connected to money. So that's with a rather formidable obstacle for us, but nothing's ever stopped levees.org before,
Right.
as you know. And just because something difficult doesn't mean impossible. So we decided that we were going to take on this as a mission, but we had some things that those good people, I know some of the people actually, we have something they didn't have. Item number one is we have this very recent failure that the whole world saw on TV, and that is the failure of the levees in New Orleans. Okay, we've got that, number one. Number two, we have got the media on our side. The media has already been paying close attention to this. The Associated Press did a nationwide story. It appeared everywhere, including the Washington Post, about this initiative that levees.org launched a year ago.
Great. Excellent. I didn't realize. That's super.
Yeah, I mean, getting the media behind something, the media is never your friend, as I'm sure your listeners know. The media is not your buddy. However, if the media can help you expand the reach of your message, great.
Right.
Great. Let them go. Let them go.
And if your position isn't controversial, if your position isn't going against obvious big money forces, they'll consider it. They'll consider broadcasting it.
Absolutely. So include the media if you're trying to get the reach out, get a message out about something, include the media. And then there's also something else that they did that we're going to have that those group of engineers did not have, and we're getting public support behind it. And we're getting public support in a variety of ways. The average citizen at large out there can sign a petition that we put up on Rally Starter that basically says, I think that students in the US studying for their bachelor's should receive instruction on engineering failures.
Now, is this all students or just civil engineering and engineering students?
Just those students working toward their bachelor's in engineering.
Gotcha.
Okay. And then maybe it should be all of them. You've gotten me thinking about
that's interesting. That's intriguing, isn't it? Because it's never
Yeah.
just an engineering issue. It's a political issue. It's an economic issue. It's a financial issue. Yeah, but at least if we could start with the engineers, that would be a good place.
I think that'd be a good place to start. But I'm going to make a note of that comment you made. So what else have we got? We're also going to get, in addition to the citizen at large, like you, Ken, me, Sandy. We're not engineers, but we have an opinion on this, a strong one. Another thing we're going to get is a nationwide list of experts and engineers who believe that this should be done. And what I notice, it's experts and engineers. You don't have to be an engineer to see the need for an initiative like this, which is a public safety campaign. That's what it is. It's all about public safety, nothing more, nothing less. And then last but not least, we're also going to get organizations on board, like the risk management delegation of UC Berkeley, or the Disaster Management Society at the University of Maryland. There's lots of such organizations out there, and trade groups. There's lots of trade groups, and we'll just one by one, nationwide, get them online, get them on board, sending us a letter of support. And after we've got this nationwide support, then we go after what we need, and that is for ABET to change their criteria in order for these engineering schools to be accredited. And for that, we're going to the deans of the schools. The number of engineering schools out there is not infinite. It's about 200. Okay. Is it a lot? Yeah, but it's a finite number of engineering schools. And we're going to go to the deans of the engineering schools, get them on board, and then it's a coalition of those deans that at the end are going to go to ABET and say, we think this change needs to be done. ABET, the last time they did an accreditation change was about 20 years ago, so it's time.
Okay. So I see. So you're meticulously lining up all the obvious players, which would be experts and engineers, related groups like the disaster groups,
Mhm.
and then actually the deans of the engineering schools themselves. Okay.
Right. So one by one, there's a time when we're going to start. And by the way, you'd be surprised at the organizations who are on board with this, like preservation societies, home preservation societies, the Audubon Society. You know, when there's an engineering disaster, the birds are affected and the houses are
Okay.
affected.
Okay. That's so
So,
true. So true.
so it's very, very broad. And in for the first time in my activist community mobilizing life, we've finally launched on something that people's automatic reaction is, yeah, sure. You mean we don't already? And
Yeah, it's
so
shocking. It's really shocking. I wonder, so the Envision course would be a sort of a catalog of engineering failures and what, what happened, I guess what the consequences were, how the failure came to be. I wonder if part of it is going to be the responsibility of engineers to speak up if they're in the middle of something and it looks like it's going in the wrong direction. I've been doing a lot of the reason I bring this up is I've been doing a lot of work with nurses lately, and I did a book recently called What the Nurses Saw. There's another book by that title, but it's obviously someone with my name on it. Um, and they actually have in their professional oath that they are the lack of a better word, spokesman, the advocate. Nurses are required to advocate on behalf of their patients. So I just wonder if perhaps that could be part of the mix, that one of your professional responsibilities as a civil engineer is if you see that, gee, we're using cement that we know doesn't work, you're supposed to raise your hand and say something. Just a thought.
that what you're referring to right now is, I believe, it's my understanding is that's ethics,
Mhm.
ethics in engineering, and students working toward the bachelor's in engineering are required to take an ethics course.
Oh, good. Okay.
And I believe they also, it's part of their continuing education to take ethics courses.
Oh, good, good.
So that I believe is entrenched in the universities, and they're being taught that. And this goes a step further, and it just brings these failures to their attention that we feel needs to be part of every student's education. As far as what the course would look like, we are not recommending a whole new course because talk about something that's going to for the university to say no to. They're likely to say no. However, we're suggesting that they tuck, articles, videos, books, into current curriculums without the burden of a whole new course, because then that just gets into a whole nother issue of how many credits you need to graduate,
Okay.
et cetera, et cetera. And schools, as we all know, educations are already very, very expensive. I touched briefly on this earlier, that the last accreditation change with ABET was 20 years ago. We feel that change should be every 10 years or every 12 years. Again, Levy.org and me are not the first person to believe this. So simultaneously with our campaign of getting engineering failures in classes, there's another movement of other experts working toward that, getting routine, whatever the word is, like
For
every
instance,
10 years.
reviewing
Yeah,
the accreditation. I'm surprised that doesn't already exist.
I agree. I agree.
So in other words, in order for a school to be legit, they have to get accredited
Right.
and they have to meet the standards of this accreditation
Accreditation.
body. And
Right.
that's probably a nice job. You look at some papers once a year and stamp them and you're done. Uh, so this would inject into that process of getting accredited. One of the questions on the survey would be, are you training your engineers in the realities and the history and the consequences of engineering failures?
The actual wording is it's a criterion and student outcomes. And this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but it basically says, are students who graduate from, let's say, just the fun, Dale Carnegie University Engineering School, are they, do they have an understanding of engineering failures and the lessons that can be learned? So that's the question asked, and the school has to come back and say yes, and obviously show how, give examples on how and on
Gotcha.
why.
You know, by strange coincidence, when I was in high school, our school was going up for, it was a private school, was going up for accreditation.
Mhm.
And they had some students on the school committee to somehow participate in the process. And I remember it was all these questions, you know, are you doing this? Are you doing that? And then if your answer is yes, show us the evidence that you're doing it. And all that was bundled into a document and given to the accrediting body, and they made their decision on whether to accredit the school or not.
So
So
that's
this is,
interesting. You as a student was aware of this. So it's a big deal.
yeah,
It's a big deal.
at the time I was president of the student council, you know, so I think somehow I was invited to sit on some of the committee meetings. Yeah, it's a very big deal because if you're not accredited, no one's going to go to your school. No one wants to go to school and get a degree that's not recognized.
And then you don't get any money. I'm going to share with you. I can't tell you who said this, but it's an anecdotal but very illustrative example of the challenges that our organization is up against, or this safety initiative is up against. So I'll give you an example of a college professor. He was at dinner, and he said, "Well, if you excuse me, I need to leave dinner a little early. My new class starts tomorrow, and I need to prepare." And I asked, "Well, what is it you need to do?" I was just curious. And he says, "Well, I need to change the dates on my syllabus."
That's his
This really
preparation.
happened.
Yeah.
So this, there's this little bit of, in a lack of initiative, on frozen, for lack of a better word. It is a little hard to get college professors to change what they do. They tend to be very opinionated, and a lot of them have been there a long time. But again, just because something's difficult doesn't mean it's impossible.
Yeah, exactly. As you've proven, and to sort of review some of what we were talking about earlier, I think it's very interesting. So one of your methods is when you're doing something like this, whether it's getting the word out about the levee failures or moving this awareness forward, it is to basically make a checklist of all the logical partners that you could have who would care and add their name to the effort, right? I
Mhm.
guess that's kind of like step one.
Yes. Yes, and make that list and check it twice and get people to introduce me. It's important to be introduced to, let's say, the president of. There was an interesting organization I was working with in the middle of the country that is very much into disasters and how to prevent them from being so severe. And so I waited for someone to introduce me, because that's the best way to get
Mhm.
right in to see the president or the ED, is someone who knows me, because that trust, they figure, well, I know Ken McCarthy, and if Ken McCarthy wants me to meet Sandy, well, I'm willing to meet Sandy.
Gotcha.
And that's really the best way to do it. Not the only way, of course, but it's the best way to, certainly, to get started, and then it kind of branches off from there.
Gotcha. So ideally find somebody who knows that person that you want to speak to. And I can tell, yeah, I can confirm from experience, it's maybe 100 times easier if you get a high level introduction versus if you're knocking on the door. Um, and then if you get the meeting, then you have to be prepared for the meeting.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
don't obviously, I mean, these are obvious things, but maybe not obvious to everybody. You don't want to wing it. You kind of want to know exactly what you're going to say. Um, and I imagine too that you learn as you go along. You make your first presentation, uh, you get some questions, maybe some of them you weren't ready for. Happens to all of us. Then you go back to the drawing board and continually update your presentation.
People will, everything you say is true, and I'm sure this is not just me, but the sorts of questions and pushback are highly unanticipated.
Mm.
And it's good to adjust your campaign, right from the start. I mean, one of the questions I didn't anticipate was, well, what resources will you use? Which resources will you use, for this instruction? I said, well, I mean, I know there's a lot out there, but I hadn't started collecting them and collecting, a list. So one of the first things I did is we're going to start putting up a site. We did create a little website, of course. It's important to have that. Something I learned a long time ago: dazzle them with design and capture them with content. So in other words, catch them with your little presentation, but you need more information. Here it is, and I've got a whole site all written up and ready to go that can answer any question they can pretty much possibly ask. But again, they wanted to know, well, what resources will you have on this? So I started doing exactly that. And then another thing I didn't anticipate was people just assumed that I was only interested in levee failure being studied.
Oh,
No,
sure.
even though we're clear about that, engineering failure, people have this mindset that, no, I'm the levee lady,
Right.
even though that's not what I'm saying. I have to keep saying, no, this is all failures. And so what I did to counter that is I created a standalone, I didn't create it. Landry Bone, an artist and website creator, created this great website using Notion, which is a great new platform with a nice, clean logo, with all of the public safety campaign, who's on board, what we're trying to do, et cetera, that's separate from my organization of levees.org.
Gotcha. Does it have its own domain name?
Yes, it does. It's called EF, as in engineering failure, efeducation.notion.com.
Gotcha. efeducation.notion.com. Great. Great. Yeah. So you've become known through your work from levees.org. So that's an advantage because people know you have credibility. But then when you go to bring a new issue to the public or to professional people, people do tend to just default and say, oh, it's the levees lady. This must be about levees. I guess that's a really important point. Don't expect people to figure it out. You kind of have to be unbelievably explicit about everything even when you're presenting to very intelligent people.
People tend to, including intelligent people, tend to make leaps when they're listening. They leap they think they know what you're going to say and tend to leap, and try not to let them do that.
Gotcha. So you got your website. When you think of new things to put on the website based on the feedback you're getting from the people you're presenting to live, you update the website. Um, and you've been in this situation thousands of times. I know I have been too. You're making a presentation to somebody and you can't answer a question. Some people may not know what to do. What do I do? I can't answer this question. How do you handle that when somebody asks you something, you're like, gee, I don't know the answer to that.
That's a really, really good point to make. And the first thing I was going to say is what not to do. Don't say, well, I'm not an engineer, or I'm not this, or I'm not that, or never apologize, and never put yourself in any way that sounds like you're on the defensive, ever. What I would do is if I didn't know the exact answer, I would respond with some sort of data that they probably didn't know. And then, so you've just provided them value. You provided them information that they probably didn't know. Okay. And then I would say, I can get the answer for that, just as soon as as soon as we sign off on this call.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Gotcha.
But never be defensive. And it's so often I see people doing that. I go, why? There are some people say, never say I'm sorry. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is, why should you, an expert, ever feel like you should be put on the defensive in any way, or ever feel that way, or ever portray that? And I don't mean bait and switch either. I don't mean that. But you are. If you were talking to me, I am the expert. And I'm not going to be defensive if you ask me a tough question that may be irrelevant, or maybe maybe something I just didn't know about. But most often, Ken, the questions you're going to get that I don't know the answer are unreasonable questions that I'm not the right person to ask a question like that.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's what's more often than not happens, an unreasonable expectation, like to say just for fun. So Sandy, so what you're trying to do is in all these 200 plus schools, you want them all to teach a course in engineering failures, and you plan to get that done by when? Okay, so
Hmm.
immediately, it's a big job.
Right.
Okay, it's a big job, and saying, well, when are you going to get all this done? And again, like I said, I would say, well, thank you for, I'm flattered that obviously you think I can get it done. I appreciate that. Thank you. And then just, provide what value could I provide in that situation? I could come back and say, about a tenth of them are, the more elite schools, and then the rest of them, all fabulous schools. They're just not as expensive, but every bit as good.
Right.
Okay, and just provide value, and then see what I'm saying. Say, but I'm flattered that you thought I knew the answer to that. Thank you. I really am flattered.
Gotcha. You know that
Humor, a big smile always works too.
the, absolutely, absolutely. And just, number one, be as well prepared as you possibly can,
Right.
and know that you're going to probably be asked questions that you can't answer. And it's not your responsibility to know the answer to every single question on the spot, and that it's a learning process. As a sidebar, the person with the commercial instinct in me says some textbook author is going to make a fortune on this. They're going to write a textbook on engineering failure, and it's going to be required purchase in 200 programs. Maybe not formally required, but if a school wants to solve their problem on the issue of needing to teach about failure, one of the ways to solve it is to have a new textbook requirement for their engineering students. It would be a really interesting book for the general public, actually, even just 12 chapters on great engineering failures. And when you think of the lives this will save, right? Because people get killed as a result of engineering failures. I mean, New Orleans is one example, one dramatic example. You and I were talking earlier about Flint, Michigan, and the terrible ongoing water problem still there. That's an engineering failure. So people get killed and injured by engineering failures, and then the financial cost is staggering. I forget what the final bill was to rehabilitate New Orleans' physical plant structure.
It's 186 billion in 2022 US dollars adjusted for inflation.
Okay, so and that for people that aren't aware of this, and I do recommend Words Whispered in Water, Sandy's book. That was a preventable disaster. It need not have happened. So that's a very big bill to pay for carelessness. Now you're also really good in enrolling helpers, and because nobody can do it alone, obviously. And there are a lot of things that you just can't do. You need somebody else to do them for you. Um, how do you go about doing that? Do you have any principles that you could share with people?
I do. Once you open up your mouth and start pointing out an issue of that the public needs to know, once you start speaking out for the public good, people will come to you, and they'll listen to you, and they might offer you. They very likely will offer you their expertise at no charge,
Mm.
um, be that law expertise, or public relations expertise, or in my case, an engineer approached me and realized that I needed a little bit of background, a little training on engineering terms if I was to continue my work. In fact, we still work together today. That all kinds of expertise. There is how to write a press release, speaking expertise, video outreach. The list is endless. But these people will join you, and they'll be happy to work at no charge because they see the value when their expertise is being used. And that's all the thanks they want. You don't even have to worry about buying them presents or anything. And it will happen. Just keep talking.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And of course, you need to know how to work effectively with people. But this is something that if you're out there and you're working for the public good, New Orleans was such a clear case. Uh, here was an
When it's clear
obvious.
that I'm not doing this for myself. I didn't even flood. My house didn't flood. My son's school didn't flood. So I'm clearly not doing it for myself. But even if I had flooded, it would be easy to, even if I'd flooded up to the 10th, to the second floor, it is not difficult to make it clear that speaking out for the public good isn't about yourself. It's about everybody.
Gotcha. And then, of course, there was a whole city of people that most of them, or a large number of them, understood the issue. And then, of course, because it was such a high profile event and New Orleans is such a high profile city, and it was so unjust that you would get people from outside to say, what can I do to help? Let's
Even
remedy this.
outside the city.
Yeah,
Everybody, if you were old enough to watch television on August 29th, around Labor Day of 2005, you watched this disaster.
that's right. That's right. And speaking of that, 20th anniversary coming up
Mhm.
next year.
Yes, 20 years.
And of course, we
When well, actually, I prefer to use the word catastrophe.
gotcha.
When this catastrophe happened 19 years ago, I remember being on the phone with my brother from Massachusetts when he finally was able to get through to me on my cell phone because all cell towers were down. It was a week after the catastrophe. I said to my brother, in 10 years, we'll all still be talking about what happened here. Little did I know. I fully expect this conversation to be still going on 100 years, in 100 years,
Yeah,
no differently from the Titanic.
yeah. And and luckily, now we know why it happened, because to bring this full circle to where we began, the original narrative, and it was impressed with great emphasis by all the news media, was that this was just a bad break, an act of, they used to like to use the phrase act of God, nature, Mother Nature, and it was no such thing. It was an engineering failure, design failure, construction failure, and the levees. I forget the number. Was it 52 different?
52.
Yeah, 52 different places. The levees just collapsed, not because of some extraordinary storm, because the storm had passed, but because they just weren't built properly, and they couldn't withstand the, I guess, the surge that came after the storm. Uh, so I want to recommend the book again to everybody. It's Words Whispered in Water. If you have if you have a notion that you want to improve some condition in the world, this book is a great textbook. It's a story of the levees.org effort, but it lays it out almost day by day. First Sandy did this, then she did this, then she was confronted with this, and then she twisted around and got around that one, and then they put this wall up, and she dug under that wall, and then they put another wall up, and she crawled over at night. It's really an interesting story, and it shows you what it takes to get things done, which is so important because none of us are trained in this. We know how to go to school, we know how to go to work, we know how to get a paycheck. But this is actually a kind of, it's an entrepreneurial, even though it's not business related and no revenue got generated. In fact, the opposite. It requires an entrepreneurial spirit, which says, hey, there's this big thing I want to do. I got to figure out how to get it done. I got to enroll as many people as I can to help me. I got to figure out who the stakeholders are. I got to figure out where the targets are that I can go after. And I just have to relentlessly go after it. So if you have an inkling, even if you have a business plan, actually, I would read this book because it shows what it takes, and it takes a lot. Well, Sandy Rosenthal, thanks so much. The book again is Words Whispered in Water. The original effort is levees.org. And then the new website, which is a mission to get all of our engineering schools to include explicit instruction in the reality of engineering failures, the reality, the consequences, how to prevent them, why they must be prevented. That website again, could you give it to us?
It's efeducation.notion.site. SITE.
Gotcha. Engineering Failures Education is a public safety campaign to require all students working toward their bachelor's degree in engineering in the U.S. to receive instruction on engineering failure and the lessons learned from those failures. So that's another big part of this kind of an enterprise. You need to state what it's all about as succinctly and clearly and impactfully as you can, and I think you did very well with that.
Make it simple, and then if they want more detail, here it is, and have a site where they can go to check out the detail. And in the case of engineers, they love detail.
Oh
So
yeah,
it's important to have it for them.
and decimal points to the numbers to the right of the decimal point. I want to end on this one thing you said, which was so interesting, which is dazzle them with the
With design, capture them with content.
Gotcha. So you need both. You can't just dump a pile of statistics on someone's desk, and you can't just be all flash. You need some flash, and then you need to back it up with some deep content. Great. Well, Sandy, thank you so much. Oh, go ahead, please. Yeah.
I was going to say, I didn't make that up. I wish I had. I actually took a course, goodness, probably 40 years ago, a very short course. And it was, so I learned that a long time ago, and I use it every day.
All these little communications tricks, ethical communications tricks that help keep you on track. And one of my favorite ones, I'll just share one, is make your point, don't blunt it. In other words, so as soon as you've said enough and you can see that everybody gets it, now you can move on to the next thing. Don't you know what I mean? So there's a lot of these little tricks that make all the difference in the world. And this is, bottom line, this is a communication game. And the better you can communicate, and the more relentless you are in a pleasant way, the more likely you are to succeed. So to all the activists out there, I hope you'll study the way Sandy does what Sandy does, because she's done some amazing things, and now she's working on another very important initiative.
Thank you. Appreciate it.